Hey guys, welcome to English class today. Not exactly the way that I planned on presenting this material to you guys, but I believe that it will be effective because really you need to be looking at the words and reading along with me for this activity. Okay? You're going to be writing a comparison and contrast paragraph today, and you're actually going to be doing that. I don't know if it's tomorrow or another time sometime in this packet. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Look at exercise 15. This is in your book, in your grammar workbook, but I'm going to read it through and go over the instructions with you as to what to do. Okay, so here we go. Look at what it says in exercise 15. Write a paragraph of 100 to 300 words using comparison and contrast. Well, I'm about to go over what that is, but it says number 1, you got to follow the instructions very carefully, okay, guys? Number 1, select 2 things you wish to compare. There's a list down here of 6 options, but you can also choose your own. You just need to specify it in the title. You may use the suggestions listed below, like it says. Number 2, make a list of significant points of comparison. Okay, that's like a what? That's a brainstorm, right? And you got to write it out. I got to see that you brainstormed it because you can't do comparison and contrast well unless you have good points. Number 3, decide which of the 3 methods of presentation you will use. And I'm about to present those 3 methods right now. And number 4, write and revise the paragraph. So guys, you need to rewrite it again. You need to write it, and you can write it like fast. It's a rough draft. You need to correct it, and you need to write it again, okay? And write it correctly and using the best English that you can, okay? You also need to write what method you use on the top with your title. So I'll get into those specifics right now as well while I present the methods. So let's do this. Okay, so let's get into what comparison and contrast are. Look what it says. This is in your grammar handbook, so it would be good to go to page 176 in your handbook of grammar, 176, and follow along with me and take some notes because all this stuff is here and you're going to need it for your example. It says use comparison and contrast to show the similarities and differences between 2 or more subjects. So you're comparing and you're contrasting. Compare is like the things that they have in common. Contrast is the things that they have differently. So this could be person, place, things, or ideas. Select significant points of comparison directly related to your purpose, then develop those points. Okay, so that means have a plan and develop it well, right? Okay, you don't write like a bazillion things and then not have enough opportunity to develop them. You pick the things that are going to be a good defense about why they're similar and why they're different and then develop them well. It says these are the 3 common methods of presenting points of comparison. The first one is subject at a time. Guys, that just means that you're going to present one of the subjects first and then another subject next. Okay, look what it says. In the first portion of the paragraph, you present a complete picture of the first subject. In the second portion of the paragraph, you present a complete picture of the second subject and discuss the comparable points. So as you're presenting the second subject, the second tema, you're presenting how they compare and contrast to each other. If the discussion is some length, you may wish to separate paragraphs. That's all. So like, for example, let's say that you're comparing apples and bananas. Okay, something totally simple. Then you would first talk about apples, talking just about apples, and then move over to talking about the next subject, which is bananas. And during your discussion about bananas, you can say, so like I said about apples, this is the same in bananas. Or like I said about apples, this is completely different in bananas. Okay, so one subject at a time. That's the first method. The second method is point by point. So this is where you develop your points, and look what it says. You take up one point and tell how each subject compares on that one point. So now you're not going subject by subject. You're going find your comparison and contrast and talk about those points isolated. So like I said before, the first one is subject by subject. First subject, second subject, comparing in between. This one is first point, second point, third point. Okay, so apples are both fruits. Let's talk about that. Then apples are different, or apples compare in their size and shape, and then talk about that, okay, point by point. It says you take up one point and tell how each subject compares on that point. Then you take up the next point and tell how each subject compares on that point. Use this method if you wish to emphasize the individual points of comparison and not necessarily the overall subject. So it depends on your emphasis. You can use this when people are very ya tienen mucho conocimiento about your temas, okay, like apples and bananas. It's good to do point by point because it's not like you're introducing the subject of an apple and a banana to them, right? Okay, look at number 3, likeness and difference. This is where you give all the similarities of the subject first, then you give the differences, or vice versa. The first selection below is an example of the subject, etc., etc., and I'm going to show you the selection. So what is likeness and difference? First, you talk about how they're alike, and then you talk about all the different things about them. Okay, so here's the 3 methods of organization. Let's review one more time. Okay, so again, subject at a time is one subject, then another subject, right? Point by point is talk about one point, then talk about another point. Likeness and differences, talk about how they're all alike, and then talk about how they're all different. Those are your ways that you can organize your paragraphs. And really, you just have to, it's not like you're going to pick the same one every time. You're going to decide based on the subject, based on your audience, and based on how it's best going to be effective to write it that way, okay? So remember on your paper to write which method you chose to use. And make sure you have your brainstorm, and then make sure you have your title. Okay, here we go. Let's look at the example for subject at a time. You're going to see that your topic sentence is going to determine whether or not your comparison and contrast sounds good or not. So make sure that your topic sentence is very thorough. It says all forms of human government may be classified broadly as autocratic or democratic. Do you guys see that from that topic sentence? You can see exactly what they're going to be comparing, autocratic or democratic, right? So then it says, the Greek word auto means self. Kratia means to rule. Thus, autocratia or autocracy, literally means to rule by one's self. Autocracy is the rule by one whose will is supreme. In autocracy, the ruler both makes the laws and enforces them, and the people have little or no say in the direction of the government, okay? We're going to keep reading about this, but I do want you guys to notice that, look, the whole thing is talking about autocracy. So yes, it uses the topic sentence to introduce the fact that they're going to be talking about autocracy and democracy, but then the author only talks about autocracy first, and then is going to compare on the second subject. Okay, now let's look at this one. Second subject, right? Second paragraph, or you can even do it in the same paragraph. Demos is a Greek word meaning the people. In democracy, the people rule, either directly by a popular vote or indirectly through elected representative. Democracy gives the people a say in the laws that govern them. Both extremes have their advantages and disadvantages. The challenge of nations throughout history has been to find a favorable balance between the two. So this subject by subject leaves the reader to kind of draw their own conclusions and find the comparisons. They're not going to be laid out 100% directly because they're in different paragraphs, but they do use the conclusion to bring them both back together again before ending the paragraph. Okay, here we go. Now we're going to see an example of point by point. Here's the topic sentence. Okay, learn a lot from these topic sentences, okay, guys? What a difference in perspective we find between what the Bible teaches and what evolution teaches. So clearly, we're going to be seeing the differences and the similarities between evolution and creation. First, the Bible teaches that man was created in the image of God, whereas evolution implies that man is nothing more than a highly evolved animal. That was point number 1. Point number 2, second, God's word presents man as a lost sinner in need of pardon and reconciliation with God, but evolution presents him as the pinnacle of evolutionary perfection and the master of his destiny. Okay, point number 3. In God's sight, each person has a great value in the universe, and God has a definite plan for him and for human history. Evolution, on the other hand, implies that the individual is of little value and there is no purpose and direction to man's history. Finally, the Bible teaches that man has an eternal soul and will live somewhere forever. Sadly, the evolutionist teaches that man does not have a soul and will simply cease to exist when he dies. So guys, you can see that this way, you're going to be able to very easily see, you could list the comparison and contrast and bullet points and points quickly for what the author told you right here. So it just depends on your purpose and depends on what you want to do to organize these paragraphs to compare and contrast whatever tema you choose. Okay, so these are really good options for you. Okay, here we go. Let's see the example of likeness difference, which means that they're going to show either all the likeness first or all the difference first and then switch it up. Okay, here we go. So Grant and Lee were in complete contrast, representing two diametrically opposed elements in American life. So what are we comparing? Grant and Lee. Grant was the modern man emerging beyond him, ready to come on the stage. Was the great age of steel and machinery, of crowded cities and a restless, burgeoning vitality. Lee might have ridden down from the old age of chivalry, lance in hand, silken banner fluttering over his head. Each man was the perfect champion of his cause, drawing both his strengths and weaknesses from the people he led. Okay, so that is something they had in common, you guys, that they were both a champion of their cause in drawing both the strengths and the weaknesses from the people that they led, okay? Yet, it was not all contrast after all. So they were talking about just contrast, then they were talking about similarities, but then look what it says. Different as they were in background and personality and underlying aspiration, these two great soldiers had much in common. Under everything else, they were marvelous fighters. Furthermore, their fighting qualities were very much alike. Okay, so starts at the beginning, talking about how they're different. One was modern, one was older. I know the vocabulary is weird, but that was the differences. And then they go into the similarities. Let's keep looking at it. Okay, so keep going with the similarities. Each man had to begin with great virtue of utter tenacity and fidelity. Grant fought his way down the Mississippi Valley in spite of acute personal discouragement and profound military handicaps. Lee hung on in the trenches at Petersburg after hope itself had died. In each man there was an indomitable quality, the born fighter's refusal to give up as long as he can still remain on his feet and lift up his two fists. Okay, so they're doing a great job to compare these guys that seem very, very different. It says daring and resourcefulness they had too, the ability to think faster and move faster than the enemy. These were the qualities which gave Lee the dazzling campaigns of Second Manassas and Chancellorsville, and won Vicksburg for Grant. Lastly, and perhaps greatest of all, there was the ability at the end to turn quickly from war to peace, once the fighting was over. Out of the way these two men behaved at Appomattox came the possibility of a peace of reconciliation. It was a possibility not wholly realized in the years to come, but which did in the end help the two sections to become one nation again. Two great Americans, Grant and Lee, very different, yet, under everything, very much alike. Their encounter at Appomattox was one of the great moments of American history. Okay, guys, so this is a really cool way to do it because maybe you have like a lot of differences and not a lot of similarities. Or maybe you have a lot of similarities and not a lot of differences. So do you see here that they had a lot of similarities and just quick listed the differences, knowing that a lot of people know the differences between these two guys and used it to their advantage to say like, look, it looks like they have so many differences, they can't be alike. But actually, they were very much alike. Okay, so here we go. You choose your topic. You do your brainstorm. You specify which strategy you're going to use. Make a title for it to tell me what you're comparing. Write it, correct it, rewrite it. Okay? Let me know if you have any questions. I'm sure you will do amazing.